I think I will always find extraordinary. They thought that he did. 11 minutes after 11 is the time. So, is he incredibly stupid or incredibly dishonest or a curious combination of both? Peter is in Oxford. Peter, what do you think?
Hello, James. Yeah, I mean, a couple of things on that. First of all, I'm glad you're covering this, although it's painful to hear.
It is painful to hear. But it's actually extraordinary to hear as well, because it's as if the reality of what happened is even madder than my memories.
I know. I mean, in terms of Rees-Mogg, I don't think anyone's ever got rich out of betting on Rees-Mogg's intelligence. And I think we have to give him the benefit of the doubt. But in case of Boris Johnson, absolutely, he's lying. First of all, I knew him as my local MP. He's highly plausible. He tells people what they want to hear. That's his go-to position. And he's done so many times. And bear in mind, I'm not an economist. I don't know much about the intricacies. I watched the broadcast on Christmas Eve 2020, just before the TCA was finalised. And I knew with certainty that when Boris Johnson said there would be no trade barriers, he was telling something that wasn't the truth. And I find it very hard to believe that he actually thought that this could be true. He talked about non-trade barriers very explicitly, as you played. It was very clear in the TCA, and presumably, although he obviously didn't read it, he must have known something about what was in it, and David Frost would have told him. But to go back a year previously, go back to the the Northern Ireland Protocol. He told his backbenchers, essentially, that he had signed it in bad faith.
Yes.
And we've had several people telling us that afterwards. So we know that when you
We'll undo it afterwards. We'll undo it afterwards. And that's what's led to the political stasis in Northern Ireland.
He was being deliberately mendacious on that. And,
yes, he was.
So he was doing exactly the same thing. There's no reason to suppose for 1 second that he was being dishonest in 2019 and was being honest in 2020. There's no way about that. I mean, I think the Newsnight broadcast is a step in the right direction. I mean, Newsnight has been, including in your day, of course, as a member of the team, but it's always been one of the more open BBC programmes. But the interesting thing is that BBC management are now trying to clamp down. They're shortening it and reducing its capacity to do investigative journalism.
Robbie Gibb, Theresa May's former Director of Communications, who still hasn't answered all of Alan Rusbridger's questions about an allegation from the Dean Dorries of all people that had behaved in a profoundly underhand manner trying to get his chosen candidate into the chairmanship of the BBC, has taken to lecturing Newsnight staff on impartiality. I'll say that again. Theresa May's former Director of Communications, who was put on the board of the BBC by Boris Johnson, has taken to lecturing Newsnight staff about impartiality.
Well, people need to know this. And the fact is that...
Luckily, there's a book, Peter.
I know. But people, when I wrote to the BBC about this, I got their standard response. And of course, they parroted back that, Newsnight presenters were good people and they'd be better off doing a talk show than doing serious investigations. I said, I think this is going to bring Newsnight down to the standard of Question Time.
Which suits them down to the ground, of course.
Which is the kind of programme the BBC love. And of course, the difference between Newsnight and Question Time couldn't be greater. Just one final point, though, which I was going to come back to. Your comment about a good Brexit. Some people obviously phone in and say it's a Remainers Brexit. Anybody who thought, knowing this generation of Tory politicians, that you could trust them to use discretion and wisdom and honesty in negotiating the Brexit deal and in what happened afterwards, any person who believed that to be the case would have been a fool.
I've used very rude words describing the leaders of the movement. I can be rude about the followers, but I do try to remind myself of the importance of retaining contempt for the con men and compassion for the conned. I think that's expired now. I think, if you're still clinging in like David Charlwood here, or David in Charlwood, I'm not sure whether there's a comma missing. It's Remainers like you that frustrated Brexit negotiations. I think the best analogy just dropped a moment ago. Imagine telling someone that they're driving too fast. They ignore you and crash. And then they climb out of the wreckage and shout at you, "It's your fault for telling me I was driving too fast." That is what's happening. And there's not a lot of it in my inbox, I have to be honest with you, and that perhaps is a positive, a sign of improvement, a glimmer of hope.
This is LBC.
Taylor and Ink.